He stole her. Amid a political storm, this callous confession by Donald Trump is not only shocking, it is the last straw, forcing even his most loyal allies to look for a way out. Dismissed the issue as a Democratic hoax, the DOJ memo now acknowledges that there is an abundant public interest in the investigative work conducted by the Department of Justice and FBI into those crimes. It also informs the court that all but one, this was the final blow. Just as Donald Trump was screaming about a conspiracy, his own Attorney General, Pam Bondi, publicly threw him under the bus. I think it's really great. The whole thing is a scam. It's a scam set up by the Democrats and they love talking about it. But I would like to see people exposed that might be bad. The contrast could not be more stark. While Donald Trump is desperately trying to convince the American public that the Jeffrey Epstein scandal is just a hoax and old news, his own justice apparatus is doing the exact opposite. Pam Bondi officially filed a legal document in court, a public and irreversible act, directly shattering the narrative her boss had painstakingly constructed. As the evidence of Epstein's human trafficking network became undeniable and public pressure mounted, Bondi and her team chose to protect themselves and the institution rather than continue defending Trump's increasingly outrageous lies. They understood that continuing to shield the hoax narrative would destroy not only their own credibility, but that of the entire Department of Justice. This panic was not without cause. According to biographer Michael Wolff, the White House viewed the leak of Trump's flirtatious birthday message to Epstein as a warning shot from the Maxwell family.
I imagine someone sitting in their luxurious mansion, hearing the words "America is divided," and feeling like their strategy room has just been infiltrated. I'm not surprised that even very soft comments could cause waves. By then, America was already on fire with election issues, fraud, fake news. Any mention of division would be scrutinized as an accusation. But if you listen carefully, Hanks never said Trump divided America. He just pointed out that there was a big societal conflict and he cared about it. What's funny is that sometimes the reaction went beyond expectations. A social comment was read like a personal jab. People analyzed the words like detectives solving a case. Is he subtly trashing Trump? In reality, articles everywhere were talking about division. But when it comes from a well-known actor, those words suddenly carry 10 times the weight. Now listen to the part where Hanks talks about the Constitution and America's journey toward perfection. On the surface, it may seem dry, but it's enough to make some celebrities think twice about their own actions. I think there's always a reason to be worried about the short term, but I look at the longer term of what happened. I think, Hanks was even more composed. He quoted the U.S. Constitution, talked about the journey towards perfection, and acknowledged that the road had many mistakes along the way. This wasn't a language of attack, but rather a gentle reminder about civic responsibility. But with the political climate at the time, everything could easily be read as an anti-Trump message. Many Trump supporters are always on the defensive. When they hear defend democracy, freedom, be cautious about the next term, they immediately think he's targeting Trump. The truth is, Hanks didn't need to name Trump directly. The context was clear enough for people to fill in the blanks themselves. That's the sensitive spot. He simply says what everyone knows but too many ignore. He points out the silent complicity. American politicians know how to solve this, but they want cheap labor and refuse to protect workers' rights. They stir fear to win votes, but profit from immigrant labor. The applause wasn't just for agreement. It was for shame. And that night, Jimmy Kimmel Live became the place where Americans couldn't laugh without questioning themselves. Tom Hanks just needed a few gentle words and suddenly, American politics erupted. A seemingly harmless statement sparked a raging debate. This is a vivid example of the sensitivity and contradictions in modern American society. Firstly, listen to the part where Hanks lightly criticizes the state of America and his views on the election to understand why it became the last straw for someone who's obsessed with power. About politics, you've obviously gotten involved in Joe Biden's election campaign. Why have you called this the most important election of our lives in the history of America? Well, you don't have to pay too much attention to the news to realize the great divisions that's going on. I think the United States of America is going through a great reckoning on a number of the facets of what it means to be an American. Honestly, when I listen to Hank's comments, It felt more like a conversation among those interested in the news rather than a political challenge. He simply explained why he thought that election was important because America was deeply divided. No personal attacks, no direct mention of anyone, just saying everyone can see it clearly. But anyone following American politics would understand. When a celebrity talks about division, even without naming Trump, it's like a spotlight shining on the contradictions of the time. And many of Trump's supporters would feel targeted by it. I've never been able to fully understand how it is that someone like Donald Trump is able to acquire this level of power. I always struggle to understand how his hate speech can take root in a country whose nature has always been a welcoming. There are a lot of lies flying around about immigrants, but I'm sure you have more than one story that can attest to the contrary. Talk about it. Share it. That helps. This is a direct punch to the heart of the political issue. Diego is no longer just talking about immigration. He's asking, how did hate speech take root in America? During Trump's rise, he built his political brand on fear and hatred, calling Mexicans criminals, promising to build the wall, banning Muslims. It's classic politics, creating an enemy to unite your base. But Diego dismantles that strategy by inviting the audience to share their real stories. He doesn't shout for Trump's removal. He understands that Americans aren't swayed by insults. They're swayed by memories, by people. Mainstream media calls this fact-check journalism. But Luna doesn't need complex statistics. All he needs is to remind the audience that everyone in the room has at least one story that contradicts the lies. This is a dangerous invitation to Trump and Fox News. When people speak the truth to each other, the strategy of fear collapses. It's not acceptable nor it's normal to separate families. Violence and terror are not okay. This is the moment Jimmy Kimmel Live stops being a comedy show and becomes a public conscience tribunal. Diego sets aside the jokes, looks straight into the camera and says, separating families is a crime. Trump's zero-tolerance policy was condemned by the United Nations for violating human rights. Thousands of children were parents. The Washington Post ran front-page photos of crying children behind bars, but Fox News laughed it off, calling it deterrence. Picture a darkened stage, the audience laughing at Diego's awkward attempt to speak English. He admits he's not a native speaker and asks for help. And then just after that, he drops the word deportation, a word that stirs up America's political nightmare. This wasn't just a joke about language. It was a direct jab at Trump's divisive immigration policies, the same ones that expanded deportation effort about Jeffrey Epstein.ts and led to heart-wrenching scenes at the border, with children being ripped away from their parents. From the New York Times to CNN, the media at the time called it the national moral stain. Immigration experts warned it would leave a generation of traumatized American children. People that I met shared an unspoken gratitude to this country, a country that opened its doors to them. And the most beautiful thing of all is that all these immigrants brought their stories with them. They brought their loyalties, their love, their traditions, always with the openness to adopt new ones, to grow and to complement each other in this vast cultural exchange. In this segment, Diego shifts the tone. He stops being sarcastic and starts storytelling like a friend, reminding us of what we've forgotten. This is a message for an American audience bombarded with the slogans, "Build the wall," and "They're taking your jobs." Conservative media paints immigrants as thieves, but Diego tells the story of gratitude, of people who come not just to live, but to contribute. According to the Migration Policy Institute, immigrants contribute billions of dollars in taxes each year in the U.S., but you rarely hear politicians talk about that. Fox News won't do segments celebrating success stories. Diego, on Jimmy Kimmel Live, reminds Americans that the U.S. is not just a country for native-born Americans but a collection of immigrant stories stacked upon one another. Many in the audience nod, remembering their own immigrant grandparents from Italy, Ireland, Germany, Mexico. And the more he talks about it, the worse it seems to get. And indeed, things have gotten much worse. In an attempt to explain why he severed ties with Epstein, Trump made a bone-chilling confession, one that fully exposed his callousness and distorted morality. That's such old history, very easy to explain, but I don't want to waste your time by explaining it. But for years, I wouldn't talk to Jeffrey Epstein. I wouldn't talk because he did something that was inappropriate. He hired help and I said don't ever do that again. He stole people that work for me. I said don't ever do that again. He did it again. And I threw him out of the place. According to Trump, Epstein's worst crime was stealing an employee from his club. When a reporter pressed him on whether one of those stolen individuals was Virginia Giuffre, a well-known victim, Trump calmly confirmed it. I think that was one of the people, yeah. He stole her. In Trump's world, This is precisely these kinds of confessions that have forced allies like Bondi to take action. Pam Bondi's move is a clear sign that Trump's empire is fracturing from within. Only the American people are left behind, forced to watch the chaos unfold as their leaders turn on each other, while the very institutions meant to protect them are politicized and neutralized. I've never hosted a talk show before, but I will try my best. English is not my first language, so I hope you guys will help me if I get, deported. With everything going on in this country around immigration and authoritarian policies of Donald Trump, Diego Luna, the Mexican actor and filmmaker famous for his role in Star Wars, Ander was not just there to promote a movie. He was there to speak out against the controversial immigration policies of the Trump era, policies that separated thousands of families at the border. His words weren't just a joke. They were a public act of resistance against a reality that conservative media often downplays. They knew Ghislaine Maxwell still held far more damaging material. That's why Todd Blanche, Trump's personal attorney, rushed to meet with Maxwell. This was not an attempt to bury the story. It was a desperate mission to assess the damage. Bondi's actions represented the next step in this damage control strategy. When you can no longer cover it up, publicly admit part of the truth to appear transparent. While his inner circle descends into chaos and scrambles for a way out, Trump continues his pitiful performance in front of the public, blaming everyone but himself. It's really great. The whole thing is a scam. It's a scam set up by the Democrats and they love talking about it. But I would like to see people exposed that might be bad exposed. And we'll see how that all works out. But it's getting to be very old news. If they had anything, they would have done it the week before the election because they were losing by a lot. If they had anything, they would have done it. They control the file. The Democrats controlled it, Comey and all the, sleazebags, every one of them that you read about all the time. And I guess they've got some problems now having to do with yet a different scandal, very big one. The head of the executive branch is claiming that his own apparatus is being controlled by political enemies. If that argument is true, it only means he is utterly powerless. If false, then it is a blatant lie. But Bondi's betrayal has turned that lie into a joke. How can the Democrats be controlling the files when it was Trump's own attorney general, handpicked by him, who petitioned the court to unseal them in the name of public interest? Journalist Chris Hayes accurately pointed out that Trump cannot escape this scandal simply because he cannot stop making himself look guilty. He and his administration keep behaving every day like they have something to hide. Trump himself cannot keep his story straight about Jeffrey Epstein. The speaker doesn't need to attack, but the listener feels addressed. What's interesting is that Hanks was quite humble. He called himself just a filmmaker and book reader. He didn't boast, "I know everything about politics," but instead invited people to reflect on their own. However, it's exactly that calm tone that sometimes triggers people because it's hard to argue against. He spoke softly but hit deep. The irony here is that Hanks didn't need to shout anti-Trump. He didn't print slogans and he didn't threaten anyone. But those few calm sentences were enough to make some people feel like Hollywood was teaching lessons. Some even suspected it was a covert anti-Trump campaign by the Oscars, a rather intriguing film plot if it ever came true. Instead of escalating the confrontation, perhaps listeners should try to understand why a gentle remark about the Constitution and freedom makes them uncomfortable. Maybe it's because it reminds us that democracy isn't just about winning elections. It's about the responsibility to listen,